Hello, everybody. My name is Ian Kirkpatrick. I'm an author and robot, and today we're going to do some good old R writing question asking and answering. And I'm looking forward to your guys' thoughts on whatever is discussed today because the questions always change. And before we get started, number one, check out Lamoy down in the description below if you're interested in having a short story featured on this channel. Number two, check out Pitch Fit. That's coming up if you're creative and would like your work pitched on this channel. And number three, if you enjoy what I do on this channel, please remember to like, share, subscribe for more. Keep it going, keeping the love going. More book analyses, responses, whatever you want to call them, coming soon. I like talking about the books, honestly. I like sharing with you guys the adventures that I go on while I'm reading. Whether I enjoy the story or not, it's always still an adventure. And I feel like sharing the experience I had is the closeout on what it was, especially if I could find other people that have read the book to discuss what exactly it is we went through. Oh my gosh. Okay, so with all of that said, let's go ahead and get started in the business. Are you writing to create or writing to produce? This is something I've literally just realized, and I'm hoping it helps me write better. I've wanted to be published novelist since I could write on my own. I self-published a few years ago, and I really enjoy the process and excitement. I've been plotting away at more stories because I want to do more publishing, but I'm finding lately I procrastinate the actual writing process and dream about making covers, creating a marketing plan, and just having the finished product to put out there. Hardly possible if I don't write the thing, though, right? This got me thinking, is your goal to publish, produce, or is it to make something I'm proud of, create? Is my goal to be published, produce, or is it to make something I'm proud of, create? I seem to have forgotten the golden rule. Write what you want to read, not what you think others would want to read. This isn't about publishing, this is about creating. I want to create something that I enjoy. Sunday ramblings, but maybe this helps someone. I write because I have freaking so many stories to tell, so many lives to live, and so many worlds to see. So I talk about this a lot, and I think it especially comes through I'm seeing it more, I think. I'm all over the place right now. Okay, so going back. I write because I see the world in a certain way, and I see certain stories that need to be told because of the perspective that I have, if that makes sense. And so by hearing these characters and packaging their lives in a way that other people can experience them, I'm sharing ideas or manners of life that I see with other people to hopefully get them to see the things that I see. A lot of what I do, especially in exaggeration, has a lot to do with how I see the world and kind of obviously exaggerating the crap out of the things that I see in order to sort of show people the ridiculousness, the absurdity, the mannerisms that I'm experiencing. And I think one of the stories that this best comes through, it's not published yet, it's on my calendar for I don't know when, is in Creatures Lie Here. That book specifically is about an outsider, Alan Forrest, learning how to see the world through the eyes of these other people that see kind of the messed up ways of the world. So in Creatures Lie Here, a journalist goes into a mental asylum in 1954 to get the scoop of this child that murdered his twin brother. Now, the child happens to be autistic, but in 1954, that wasn't really a diagnosable thing. So they just think that the kid is crazy. Now, the kid and a couple other people in this part of the asylum are telling Alan that monsters exist and you need to look into the eyes. When people show you who they are, then you believe them. And they kind of make this point that people the regular population actively reject to see the monsters that walk among them because they don't want to see them. It's kind of like if you take a picture of Dorian Gray, but you make it everybody instead of just this one person, and you make it everybody actively choosing to not look at the portraits of themselves. And that's what Alan actually wakes up to, is being able to break into that world and seeing that he has actively been rejecting to see people and the world for what they really are, because it's easier to accept what it is on the surface. Anyway, that's just a long way of me saying all of my books are basically that journey of trying to get people to see the world as I see it. Now, I'm not saying that I see it correctly, and I'm not saying everything in my books is correct or that the characters are all correct, but I'm showcasing different ideas, whether they're societal, whether they're certain character types, whether they are structures of some kind. I'm just showing the world as I see it through different characters that tell me, hey, this is a problem. So if you look at Dead End Drive, there are so many issues that are brought up in that book between character and society. If you look at Bleed More, Body More, that is specifically about societal decay and about intergenerational trauma and how it affects individuals and how we can get trapped in our own self-loathing and self-worth that we don't see what is around us and we risk ourselves. I create because I have to share the way that I see things with people. And the best way to do that is through these very unique and over-the-top characters in order to make the point that I think it kind of makes it easier to swallow, but it also makes it easier to see. And it's like a blaringly obvious thing. I think that's why I do exaggeration specifically. It's, oh, I see this little thing. And if you exaggerate it, then it just makes it easier to see. I think it also has to, I'm ranting here, but I think it also has to do with the studying and theater background, because whenever we would be learning anything in theater, they'd want you to start at going from 0 to 10. And then once you get to 10, then you start reining it back. So there was this one class in theater called Alba training. And that is where you actively train your body to get into a mood, because there are 3 main physiological components in Alba that affect and change your mood. Number 1 is your breathing pattern. Number 2 is your muscle tension. And number 3 is your facial. Yeah, and number 3 is facial pattern. And so we learned basically 6 different emotions recognized by Alba. And in order to get there, you're not going to necessarily just be able to switch into it if you're just learning it. But what would happen is that you would want to learn what it felt like when you got into it, so that you would know when that switch hit and you'd know what it felt like, so you could teach yourself to get there. So if I was going to do an example, laughter, joy is one of them. And so you want to get into the breathing pattern and the physical state of joy. And what does joy look like? Joy looks like when you're laughing. And what does a laugh look like? I don't remember. That's what it is. Okay. So with laughter, specifically, the breathing pattern gets me. As far as I'm not a teacher, and you're not really supposed to explain it unless you're in like a safe space to experience the emotions. Because when we were learning it, oh my gosh, there was this chick in my class who, as soon as she got into sadness for the first time, she was stuck in the sadness pattern for like an hour and a half after class ended. And so with sadness, again, going into, and again, oh my gosh. Oh my gosh. Oh my gosh. Okay. Anyway, once you go into those patterns, that was an example of starting to go into sadness. Oh my gosh. Once you go into those patterns, you're trying to just click into them so you know what it feels like. And then once you've hit 10, then you can start working on how to slowly get into them and not go to 10, but maybe go to a 3, because now you know how to manipulate those physiological components of the emotion. Anyway, this is just a long way for me to say, if you turn something up to a 10, then you know how to recognize it. And I think that comes out in what I'm writing. And so, long answer to the question was, I'm writing to create because I want to share what I see, and it comes out in a very, what I would call a unique way. But we probably all say that about our work. What about you? Are you creating? What drives you to create? Is it to entertain? Is it because you have a compulsion to like tell these stories and these characters just keep coming up to you and they won't leave you the frick alone? Or is it because you want to the lifestyle of the author? You want to be able to hold the book and say, I did this. You like the marketing side of it. I think you're 100% a writer by creative if you're just like the marketing side of it. It's so hard. It is so hard. Oh my gosh. Not to discredit anybody that's actually good at the marketing side of it. I'm just not. How to avoid telling when your character is expressing their inner thoughts. I know that the rules are meant to be more of guidelines to a better prose. They're not sacred, but I keep having the problems when I'm writing the inner thoughts of my characters. This concern that I'm showing too much instead of telling. Let's assume the character is thinking about some incident or another character. What could a writer do in order to get from in order to avoid breaking the rule of show, don't tell. Now, one of the problems that you're going to run into here, because you're talking about thought, is that the character is going to tell you exactly what they're thinking, because we don't really think in metaphors or in references. Show, don't tell, and the way that I see it, has more to do with actions happening in the story as opposed to happening elsewhere. But the difference in show and tell is if your character is going to school and you're going to walk through this character going through interactions with their friends, then you want to show those interactions, like show the characters talking to each other, show the characters going from their lockers to the classroom, because by showing that interaction, you're able to build the relationships and show what the actual relationships are and show how they talk to each other and show how they interact. However, if you tell that situation and you just go, well, Jenna went to the classroom with Rebecca and they were good friends and they liked each other and they talked about how much they liked each other and they liked the boy next door, that's all telling, and it keeps the reader at arm's length and it doesn't bring the reader into their life. I think that's more of the concern where the show don't tell comes from, as opposed to my character is thinking and so my character has to tell people stuff. I could be saying this because first person is I don't think there's any way to get around telling if you're doing thoughts, but my recommendation would be go and look for books and go and specifically look for bad writing. Recognize why it's bad writing and what it is that they're doing. If you can find telling in works and recognize why you don't like it or why it's bad or why it's boring, then that'll help you recognize it in your own work and the times where it's okay versus when it's not okay. So those are my thoughts. I think show don't tell is usually, when it's given as feedback, it is usually not very well explained, and it's usually given so hard as like a hardcore rule that it's not easy to understand. But show don't tell isn't a hard rule. I don't think you can get away from telling with thoughts. First draft, now what? Longtime lurker. I went to school for writing and teach English, but fell out of creatively writing on my own after college. I had recently had 2 weeks off of work and began writing a nonfiction piece that has been lingering in my mind. I just completed everything I had outlined, written without any revisions or rereads. I ended up around 44,000 words, the most I have ever written. My question is, now what? So I've actually done a video on the channel already about what my writing process is, if you want to see an exact look at how I go through from draft 1 to draft 2 to revisions and all of that. But what comes next is however you want to deal with revision. For me, revision comes with creating a new section of a document, putting them side by side, and just completely rewriting the document word for word, copying what's on the right, but adding things or completely changing things as I go. I say this knowing that full scenes of Body More 2 are going to be completely changed because I put the first draft of them in the wrong location. And by moving the location, the conversations are totally going to change. But I don't allow that to be part of my draft 1. I just make a note of it. So your next step is to go over everything that you've written and go through whatever is the correct process for you to discover your correct process for revising or rewriting. Usually I would say revision comes before editing, because if it's a first draft, you're probably going to have things that you want to change, restructure, move around, all of that noise, and that's going to be a revision, not an edit. An edit is much smaller. If this is your first book specifically or your first larger work, then you're probably going to have to try different things out to see what works for you in building the ideas and the tension and the momentum that you want. Again, I'll link it at the end of this video if you want to see how I deal with first draft to second draft to end draft. And maybe that'll give you ideas on how to tackle your projects. I would also love to hear what anybody else does to tackle their first to second drafts down in the comments below. As a reader, what would you rather see in a sequel? This is especially going to be to any of you guys that typically read sequels. I don't often read sequels or trilogies or groups, and I think that's more common in fantasy that people do read those. I read a lot of standalone because I read a lot of weird books. I guess except for the Fighting Storm series, it was a trilogy, and I guess his name was Augustin is a group series, whatever. Let's see what the question is. I finished writing a book and I'm trying to map out the rest of the series before I start querying, just in case. Basically, the first book is about 3 main characters and ends with one character banished to the book's world's equivalent of hell and another being sealed away, leaving the last MC to try and fix these issues. As a reader, would you rather the second book start with one of these circumstances being reversed, then the book be about getting the other guy out, or would you feel cheated that one is immediately reversed and Would you rather second book be about reversing the seal and then third book be about getting the MC out of hell? I think if you're going to make a sequel, then seeing any of the major changes is going to be important to the reader. So, reversing a seal and getting somebody out of a bad situation sounds like something that the reader may want to experience if they've bonded to that character. Skipping that whole section and then just having that automatically be fixed so you can move on to something else would feel like cheating the reader to me. What I prefer when I'm looking at a series is continual growth or change or things that make sense for that character to experience based on what happened in the previous parts of the stories. I hate stuff that continues to go on as a series because it's destroying the character growth, and it doesn't make sense for the character to go in that direction. With Bleed More, Body More, it became a series because after the book finished, there was still more growth for the character and more to expose, and individual arcs for the characters actually came out on their own that justified having books because they needed their own arc. But in sequels to a book, yes, I prefer that the story is continual. If you're going to do something big, like this character is in a bad situation, don't skip out of that bad situation and then just put them in another one, because you will make your readers feel cheated, especially if they are bonded with that character and we want to see them get through that struggle so we can cheer for them in doing so. Avoiding open critique of published works. Oh my gosh, I have had this conversation, and this is a spicy conversation. Everybody thinks something different. Don't think that readers don't notice this, by the way. So I've been, and I mean that probably different than you think. So I've been reading more books recently and have also been talking about them more. A few days ago, I have finished reading a relatively popular book that wasn't very good. Repeated information, flat characters, tons of filler, and very swift ending were just a couple of problems that I have found. I didn't enjoy the book neither as a reader nor as a writer, and I have voiced that opinion with someone who asked me about it. I probably shouldn't have done that, as I received a storm of critique myself, basically along the lines of, how do you know that? You haven't written anything. You shouldn't have criticized like that when you know how hard it is to write a book, and you think a publisher would publish it if it was as bad as you say. Well, yes, people publish stuff all the time. That is just not my taste. It's not the first time that this has happened either, and it tires me out. If it's true that I haven't published anything yet, that doesn't look, somebody that's never made a movie can still say whether they enjoyed a movie or not. But I've been studying the principles while writing to recognize problems in my own text. Naturally, I recognize them in other texts, but I guess someone without such knowledge cannot understand that, ? Because of this, I rarely voice my honest opinions, and even when asked, because I don't like getting into pointless arguments. For the same reason, I don't post any critiques online, positive or negative alike, and keep all of my opinions in a reading diary nobody reads. Can anyone relate? Yes, there is a huge controversy, and specifically the writing community and with authors, to not post anything critical about other authors, because one, you don't want those authors and their fans coming after you and bombing your book. That's one of the big things. But like I said before answering this question, it's not like readers don't notice. So I was on Goodreads a couple weeks ago. I don't even remember what book it was on, but I saw somebody give something a high score, and there was a comment underneath that said, do you ever give anything a lower score? And she goes, no, if it's not a 4 or a 5, I don't score it at all. And there are a lot of authors that have that policy where they will not give something a low score, and or they will not comment on stuff that they didn't like about it if they're theoretically supposed to be selling that book. There's two reasons for it. There's the number one, which is they're contractually obligated to talk about a book for one reason or another to try and help it sell it. And the other one is that they don't want to get the ire of the other author's fans at them for saying, hey, I didn't like this book. So you'll see a lot of authors that do not critique or talk negatively. And then the other thing is you'll get authors that turn on you as well. It probably happens more than you think. It is a choice that you have to make specifically as a writer if you want to be honest with your opinions or share or not share them at all, or to just not say anything but positivity. Now, as an author and a critiquer and somebody that tries to help build craft and talk about writing, I only ever try to share the things that I find important or that I use or that I actually genuinely like or dislike. Because I think that as writers, our word is very important to whether we should be trusted or not to tell a good story. And if I recommend a story that I didn't think was good and I didn't tell you it was that I didn't enjoy it. Like if I told you to read this book, it was great, whatever, and I didn't enjoy it, that devalues all of my words and all of my recommendations, from writing tips to suggestions to what I actually like to read. Now, I will suggest you guys read books that I don't like because, one, likes and dislikes are completely subjective. So something that I don't like, you may absolutely love. Some of my deal breakers may not be deal breakers for you. So I will always encourage people to read things that I do not enjoy because maybe you'll find your next favorite book. But I think it is imperative that authors actually, one, don't be malicious when you say it, but just talk about the things that you like or didn't like. Because we need to cultivate this community where it's okay to share your actual thoughts and where there is trust behind your word, and that you're not going to sell people a terrible book because it's your friend. But I see a lot of that going on in the community too, where it's, well, I will sell your book if you sell mine. I don't even care if I enjoy it or not. And yikes, man. Yikes. I always find it harder because I like to feature indie books on this channel. I like to talk about indie books and read indie books because they get so... It's just so much harder to launch them. But at the same time, it can also be really come off a lot harsher to talk critically about an indie book because they're having such a hard time. But I also don't think that it's fair to readers to treat indie books any differently than traditionally published books because they want to be treated the same, right? But if you treat one with kid gloves and one without kid gloves, then you're technically setting one up to fail because you're not treating them as if they are both professional products. So it's a really hard place to be because of what can come at you if you disagree with popular opinion. But I think it's an important thing in the writing community and in the reading community to change in that culture, to make it okay to disagree or to have different thoughts and to just share critical responses without attacking the author or without being personal to the author. They're completely different things. There's also this thing where a lot of people take critiques personally or bad reviews personally, and that's a different thing entirely. I'm a robot, so I don't necessarily cry myself to sleep when somebody's like, I don't like what you do. I'm like, yeah, I figured you wouldn't. That's just, I know me. But it's exhausting. It is truly exhausting. But also don't trick yourself into thinking that you don't have a valid opinion because you're not trained in something or you haven't published something, because most readers are not writers, but every reader has a valid opinion if they've read the book. Like, they have an experience with that book. So just because somebody didn't write their own or hasn't published doesn't mean that your opinions are invalid or the experiences you had in a book are invalid. Typically, reviews on books aren't even merit-based. They're just, this is the experience that I had, which is a personal thing. Anyway, I'm just talking in circles here. It's a difficult thing. A lot of people will say avoid critiquing published works. A lot of people won't. I try to be as honest with you guys as I can here, and I also try to make it so when I'm talking about books, you know what the book is about. I take you kind of on a shortened journey of that book, and I tell you what I either liked or didn't like, or a little bit of both. Just so we don't end on that note, how much info am I supposed to include in a sentence, and what exactly is that info? That info is whatever is important to know. What would that character notice? What does the author want you to notice? What does the narration, specifically not the author, want you to notice? Because your words in a book are the camera lens of where you want the reader to look. So let me give you an example. Here's the scene. A girl is watching TV and then decides to turn it off. Why not describe it like this? Mary is falling asleep in her chair. There is a loud TV on. She wants peace and quiet so that she can sleep. She turns off the TV with the remote. It is now quiet. She begins to fall asleep. Well, number one, begins almost never needed in a sentence. But when reading a lot of fiction, I noticed that many sentences tend to get merged together. Like, as Mary begins falling asleep in her chair, she finds herself waking up at the noise of the TV. She turns it off and then finds herself dozing into peace and quiet. I actually like the earlier version before that one. It depends on the voice of the piece and the character narrating the piece, what information you're going to put in a sentence, how you're going to break it up, where all the pauses are. It's all about the pacing, and it's all about what you want the reader to know. Let me go see if I can. There's something in Bodymore that does this too. So this is a portion from Bleed More, Body More, my upcoming novel, and it's kind of living room. But so I'm going to give you all of this detail, and then we can talk about how to figure out what goes into a sentence. All of the lights in the house are off except for the flashing TV, which makes it through the closed blinds. I don't say anything after I lock the door. I slip into my bedroom without Dad noticing. I lock my bedroom door, lean my skateboard against the wall, and fall onto my bed. The TV's too loud. My lips follow along with the same stupid mattress commercial I've heard every day for the last 6 years. Bed barn, better than the mattress farm. It's where the sheep sleep. I wait until the commercials are over and some cop show comes back on before slipping into the kitchen to grab a beer from the fridge. I fall to the bed and pop the can open. A couple of taps on the walls around me make me sit upright. They continue only until I survey to find them. Then they stop. They're like scratching between panels, a squirrel stuck between the paper-thin walls. I lay back down and reach for the beer on my nightstand. The tapping continues. It's on glass now. So there's a lot of detail in all of those, and it paints the picture, theoretically, of this girl entering her house. It's dark, the TV is on, and it's loud, and even the details of, well, like, why put in exactly what that commercial is to kind of punch in what she's paying attention to, that she has heard this commercial so many times over the last 6 years that she's sitting there saying it with the TV until it's over because it's so obnoxious, it's so overpowering that she's just wasting the time until it's over. And she doesn't have to mention getting back up to go into the living room to grab the beer. You kind of just assume it when she slips into the kitchen to grab the beer and then comes back. And in this, it doesn't. You've also got she's sitting in her room doing everything by herself. So she slips into the kitchen to grab the beer, and then in the next sentence, she's falling back on her bed because she's already established that she's sneaking around from the kitchen to her bedroom. Then I fall back on the bed implies that she's made it back to her room. And so really what it's going to come down to for what details to include in your sentence are the mood of the character, how the character speaks. Joey specifically speaks in short, sharp sentences. She's very quick. She has a running a train of thought style thinking pattern, and so you get that in the way that she looks at things, and you only notice when she notices, and you only notice what she notices, like the scratching and how she recognizes the scratching. Notice how she's not talking about the TV anymore or that she's angry. She's just noticing sensory information. So that's what's going to come into play. If Mary over here is sitting in the chair and she wants to fall asleep, we can actually figure out that she wants sleep and she wants quiet without being told that she wants sleep and she wants quiet. Personally, I've also seen a whole lot of people mushing stuff together by doing blank happens as blank happens, and that can work sometimes, but doing it too often makes your sentences repetitive, and it also most things are implied. So you don't have to say this is happening after this happens, then this happens, unless you want that extra beat in the way that things are described, because you should be thinking about the rhythm of your sentences and how the different words affect the pacing of what you're saying. So as Mary begins falling asleep in the chair, she finds herself waking up to the noise on the TV. Again, also, that framing is completely unnecessary. Like, as Mary begins to fall asleep, she finds herself. We know that we're in her head. We don't need her framing that. Mary's eyes close. But a loud Mary's eyes close. A loud commercial comes onto the TV, waking her back from her shallow slumber. She turns the TV off. Her eyes flutter closed again. This time, she falls asleep. Successfully. Stuff like that. It just all depends on the mood of the voice and everything. I'm just repeating myself now, but I hope that gives some examples of what I'm talking about. Voice is so important. Characterization is so important to specifically these types of things. And once you figure out what you want your character's voice to sound like, there's always somebody telling the story, whether it is the main character in first person or third person or some third person narrator telling the story of somebody else, or whether it is technically your voice as the third person narrator telling the story of somebody else. There is always somebody telling the story to somebody else. And that is an important voice to latch onto to tell the story in the best way possible. Once you figure that out, Then you can start picking up what are important details in order to create the setting and create the environment and create the atmosphere that you want the readers to hook onto. Not all information is important to put into a sentence in order to get people to know where the characters are, what they're doing, and what the mood is like. You can imply so much of that stuff by just picking the correct things that fit with the narrative style. And I know that's not very specific. That's a whole craft talk on but I'm going to leave it there because this video is already longer. So let me know what your thoughts are on any of these questions, these subjects down in the comments below. Thank you so much for watching. Smash that like button or tap the like button very kindly. And have a good weekend. Thank you so much for watching. Don't die.
Was that Wayland Cross in the trunk? Do you know, or is that something that's still being figured out?
The person in the trunk was not Wayland Cross.
Is he in trouble?
We don't know who did it, but as the owner of the car, the longer he's missing, the worse it looks for him.
Cross isn't a killer. For the last couple of years, the average number of murders in Baltimore has been over 300, and it's been going up. Mind you, that's only whatever the badges count as official murder, and believe me, there are people that don't count when they die. Wayland? If you're down here, tell me. I'm not talking to the badges, I've been looking for you. They found a body in your trunk. Why? Did you do that? To the left, plain black letters read along the wall, "You walked in the corridor. Once that ends, you chose the dark is on the right." My vision goes blurry, flickers black and black and black for longer intervals until I can't see anything at all. I'm not screaming anymore, but my voice echoes back to me. Where the hell am I? You're dead, Josephine. Even smart people do stupid shit sometimes, right?